Okay, so you sent over a whole stack of articles about the Canadian job market for December 2024.
Mm.
We've got Investment Executive from
Right.
Financial Post,
Yeah.
CTV News,
Mm-hmm.
and even some spicy Reddit threads
Yeah.
to add some flavor to the mix.
Yeah, yeah.
It looks like you're really trying to get to the bottom of these 91,000 new jobs everyone's buzzing about.
Right.
Is it all sunshine and rainbows, or is there uh, something more to the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think these sources give us a pretty good starting point for this deep dive.
Okay.
On the surface, adding 91,000 jobs with the unemployment rate dropping to 6.7% seems like a slam dunk victory.
Right.
But like you said, there could be more lurking beneath the surface.
Right. So let's start with the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Some economists are saying Canada might actually be in a recession despite this job growth.
Mm-hmm.
How can that be possible?
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The argument boils down to how Canada's population boom,
Okay.
fueled by immigration, is impacting the economy.
Okay.
More people mean more economic activity,
Right.
which can lead to job creation, as we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But economist Lars Osberg, who is quoted in the Financial Post, argues that this population growth could be masking a recession by artificially inflating GDP.
Okay.
Essentially, the economic pie is getting bigger, but it's being sliced into more pieces.
So if the population growth slows down, the cracks of the foundation start to show?
Exactly.
Was that what he's suggesting?
It's like building a house of cards.
Uh-huh.
It might look impressive for a while,
Okay.
but it only takes a slight breeze to make it all come tumbling down.
Okay.
And there's another potential breeze on the horizon,
Okay.
the incoming U.S. administration, and their talk about tariffs.
Oh, yeah. The Reddit threads were buzzing about that, too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Canadians are worried about what those tariffs could mean for their jobs.
As they should be.
Yeah.
Remember, Statistics Canada highlighted that 1.8 million Canadians work in industries highly dependent on the U.S. market. If tariffs are imposed, those industries could take a big hit, leading to job losses and a ripple effect throughout the economy.
That's a lot of people potentially affected.
It is.
So we got this record job growth,
Right.
but also a potential recession looming
Mm-hmm.
and the uncertainty of U.S. trade policy.
Yeah.
Talk about mixed signals.
Yeah.
Do the sources tell us where these new jobs are popping up?
They do.
Maybe that can shed some light on the situation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The big winners in December were education,
Okay.
transportation and warehousing,
Mm-hmm.
and finance, insurance, and real estate.
Okay.
We also saw a significant increase in public sector jobs,
Okay.
with 40,000 added compared to 27,000 in the private sector.
That is interesting, especially since there was a lot of back and forth on Reddit about public versus private sector jobs.
Right.
Some users were arguing that public sector jobs aren't real jobs
Mm-hmm.
or don't contribute as much to the economy.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that essential services like healthcare and education are largely within the public sector.
Yeah.
These are vital roles that keep our society functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Also, recall those 1.8 million Canadians whose jobs are linked to the U.S. market.
Right.
A good portion of those are private sector jobs.
Okay.
So it's not as simple as saying one is inherently better than the other.
It's more nuanced than that.
It is.
What about self-employment?
Yeah.
Did the sources touch on that at all?
Yes, and it's an interesting trend.
Okay.
Self-employment actually rose for the first time in almost a year,
Wow.
with 24,000 new self-employed Canadians.
So could that be a sign that more people are becoming entrepreneurial? Or is it a reflection of people struggling to find traditional jobs and having to create their own opportunities?
It could be a combination of both.
Okay.
It might suggest some are choosing to take control of their careers,
Yeah.
but it could also indicate difficulty finding stable employment, forcing others into self-employment out of necessity.
Okay, so a potential upside and a potential downside to that increase in self-employment.
Right.
But let's talk about wages now. After all, a job isn't much good if it doesn't pay the bills.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The reports indicate average hourly wages are up 3.8% year over year,
Okay.
which initially sounds promising.
Hmm.
However, is that keeping pace with inflation?
Right.
And this is where that whole recession debate becomes even more relevant.
Right, because a Reddit user brought up a good point about how average wages can be deceiving,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to income inequality.
Right.
A high average doesn't necessarily mean everyone is benefiting equally, does it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, a high average can often hide the reality that many people are struggling to keep up with rising costs.
Right.
We need to consider the bigger picture: cost of living, housing affordability, access to essential services, and that leads us perfectly into the human side of all this.
Yes, because this is where those economic numbers start to represent real people's lives. We're not just talking about statistics anymore,
Right.
but the impact these trends have on individuals and communities across Canada.
Absolutely. And sometimes those individual stories can reveal a starkly different picture than the seemingly positive economic data.
Speaking of those individual stories, the sources mentioned a report from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario.
Yes,
Can you tell us more about that?
I can.
What are some of the key takeaways?
The report paints a rather concerning picture of homelessness in Ontario,
Okay.
stating over 81,000 people were experiencing homelessness in 2024.
Wow.
It's a staggering number.
Yeah.
The AMO also estimates that Ontario needs to spend an additional $13 billion over the next decade to adequately address this issue.
Wow, 81,000 people.
Yeah,
That's incredibly disheartening.
it is.
And it really puts those average wage discussions into perspective.
Right.
It's not just about the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the very real human cost of these economic trends.
Absolutely. And this is where the Reddit threads become particularly valuable. We hear directly from people experiencing these challenges,
Right.
sharing their stories and struggles. One Redditor, for example, shared their experience of living in a tent for weeks just to save up enough money for an apartment despite having a job.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
To think that even with a job, so many people are struggling to afford basic necessities like housing.
Right.
It really highlights the gap between the economic data and the reality on the ground for many Canadians.
It certainly does, and it underscores the need for policies that go beyond simply creating jobs
Okay.
and focus on creating good-paying jobs that offer a living wage,
Yeah.
benefits, and a path to stability. We also need policies that address affordable housing and access to essential services.
So it's not just about how many jobs we create, but what kind of jobs they are and what kind of life they can support.
Exactly.
It's about looking at the bigger picture and addressing the systemic issues contributing to poverty and homelessness.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that economic growth, while important, doesn't always translate into well-being for everyone.
Right.
We need to consider the human cost of economic policies and strive for a system that benefits all Canadians, not just a select few.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
I've got record job growth,
Uh-huh.
but also the potential for a hidden recession,
Right.
the looming uncertainty of U.S. trade policy,
Yeah.
the impact of population growth,
Mhm.
and the very real human cost of economic hardship.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot to unpack, but hopefully this is helping you see the bigger picture and understand the complexity of the situation.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you some things to consider as you continue exploring this topic. After all, there's always more to learn and understand.
Now, I know we touched on the potential impact of U.S. trade policy,
Right.
but I think it deserves a closer look,
Yeah.
especially considering those 1.8 million Canadian jobs that are tied to the U.S. market.
Right.
What kind of scenarios are we looking at if those tariffs actually happen?
So let's start with industries like oil and gas extraction
Okay.
and manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
These are sectors heavily reliant on exporting to the U.S.
Right.
If tariffs are imposed,
Yeah.
it could significantly increase the cost of Canadian goods in the U.S. market, making them less competitive.
Okay.
This could lead to decreased demand, forcing companies to scale back production, potentially resulting in job losses.
So those tariffs could create a domino effect,
Exactly.
starting with those export-heavy industries
Right.
and then rippling outwards.
Yeah, and it wouldn't stop there.
Okay.
The transportation sector,
Sorry.
particularly trucking companies that move goods across the border,
Right.
would also likely feel the pinch.
Okay.
Reduced trade volume means fewer shipments, which could lead to layoffs and a slowdown in that sector.
Okay, so we're already seeing how these tariffs could potentially impact several key industries.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture?
Yeah.
How might this affect the overall Canadian economy?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is a potential decrease in foreign investment.
Okay.
If the U.S., one of Canada's largest trading partners,
Right.
becomes less attractive for Canadian businesses,
Okay.
it could make investors hesitant to put their money into the Canadian economy.
Yeah.
This could slow down economic growth and make it harder for businesses to expand and create new jobs.
So a decrease in foreign investment could lead to a sort of economic stagnation,
Mm-hmm.
making it harder for Canada to recover from a potential recession, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
And remember, this is all happening against the backdrop of that potential hidden recession we discussed earlier.
Right.
If Canada's economic growth is indeed overly reliant on population growth and that growth slows down,
Mm.
the combined impact of a recession and reduced trade with the U.S. could be quite significant.
It sounds like a perfect storm brewing.
Yeah.
But what about the Canadian government?
Right.
Surely they're not just sitting back and watching this unfold.
Of course not.
Yeah.
The Canadian government is likely exploring various options to mitigate the potential impact of these challenges.
Okay.
One possibility is negotiating trade agreements with other countries
Okay.
to diversify Canada's export markets and reduce reliance on the U.S.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, they could spread the risk and open up new opportunities for Canadian businesses.
Right.
What else might they do?
Well, another option is investing in domestic industries to boost innovation and make them more competitive globally.
Okay.
This could involve providing grants, tax breaks, or other incentives to encourage businesses to develop new technologies and products.
So investing in homegrown talent and innovation could help Canada become less vulnerable to external shocks, like tariffs or a slowdown in the U.S. economy.
Exactly.
Right.
By fostering a strong domestic economy, Canada can better weather those external storms and create more resilient industries.
Okay, so those are some potential strategies the government could employ. But what about us, the average Canadians? What can we do to prepare for these potential challenges?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
One thing individuals can do is focus on developing skills that are in high demand across various industries. This can make you a more valuable asset to employers and help you weather potential job market fluctuations.
So diversifying your skill set, much like the government diversifying trade partners.
Precisely.
Okay.
Another thing you can do is stay informed about economic trends and policies. By understanding the forces at play, you can make more informed decisions about your career, finances, and overall well-being.
That's where deep dives like this come in handy.
Exactly.
By digging into these sources and analyzing different perspectives, we can equip ourselves with the knowledge to navigate these complex issues.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially in times of uncertainty.
Now, I know we've been focusing on the potential negative impacts, but are there any potential silver linings to these challenges?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Could they create opportunities for growth or innovation in unexpected ways? It's important to remember that challenges often breed innovation.
No.
For example, the potential threat of tariffs could push Canadian businesses to become more efficient and find creative solutions to overcome those trade barriers.
So a little pressure can sometimes lead to breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It could also encourage Canadian businesses to explore new markets and partnerships they might not have considered before. This diversification could lead to long-term growth and stability, making the Canadian economy more resilient in the face of future challenges.
So there's a chance that what seems like a crisis could actually spark positive change and lead to a stronger, more adaptable Canadian economy.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that challenges, while daunting, can also present opportunities for growth, innovation, and resilience.
Okay. So we've explored the potential impacts of U.S. trade policy on the Canadian economy, from the industry-specific effects to the broader implications for investment and growth. We've also talked about what the government might do to mitigate these challenges and what we as individuals can do to prepare.
Yeah.
Now I'd like to shift gears and talk about another source you sent,
Okay.
the Reddit threads.
Yes. Those threads provide valuable insights into the human side of this economic picture, don't they?
Absolutely.
They give us a glimpse into the anxieties, hopes, and lived experiences of everyday Canadians.
And one topic that kept popping up was the affordability crisis,
Right.
particularly in Ontario. We talked about the AMO report and those staggering numbers on homelessness.
Yeah.
But the Reddit threads really brought home the struggles people are facing.
You're right.
Yeah.
Those personal anecdotes provide a powerful context to the data and remind us that these aren't just abstract economic trends, but realities impacting real people's lives.
Yeah. For example, one Redditor talked about working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, while another shared their experience of being priced out of the rental market despite having a steady income.
Yeah.
It really highlights the disconnect between the apparent job growth and the lived reality of many Canadians.
Yes. And it underscores the need to look beyond the aggregate data and consider the distributional effects of economic policies.
Okay.
Who is benefiting from this job growth?
Right.
Are the wages keeping pace with the rising cost of living?
Yeah.
These are crucial questions to ask when evaluating the health of an economy.
Absolutely. And those Reddit threads are full of people asking those very questions.
Right.
They're expressing frustration with the rising cost of housing,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of affordable childcare,
Yeah.
and the feeling that they're working harder but falling further behind.
It's a sentiment we hear echoed in many developed countries today.
Yeah.
The traditional markers of economic success, like GDP growth and job creation,
Mm.
don't always translate into a tangible improvement in people's lives.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
But what if some boats are anchored to the bottom?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves, is this economic growth inclusive?
Right.
Is it benefiting all segments of society? Or are some being left behind?
So it's not just about creating jobs,
Right.
but creating good jobs that provide a living wage and opportunities for advancement.
Exactly.
It's about ensuring that everyone has access to affordable housing,
Mm-hmm.
quality education,
Right.
and essential services.
Precisely. It's about creating an economy that works for everyone, not just a privileged few.
And that brings us back to the bigger question you posed earlier.
Yeah.
What does this jobs report really mean?
Right, because it's clear that a single data point, even one as significant as 91,000 new jobs, doesn't tell the whole story.
We need to consider the context, the potential risks, and the human impact of these economic trends. We need to look beyond the headlines and dig deeper into the data, the analysis, and the lived experiences of Canadians. Exactly. And we need to ask those tough questions about inclusivity, affordability, and the long-term sustainability of our economic model.
So what does all of this mean for you?
Well,
What stood out to you from these sources?
Yeah.
And what new questions or insights has this deep dive sparked for you?
one of the things that really struck me was this idea of a hidden recession.
Okay.
It's a concept I hadn't really considered before, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about the impact of population growth on economic indicators.
Right.
It's like we're inflating our economic balloon,
Yeah.
but it might not be as full as it appears.
Okay.
And if that population growth slows down, we could be in for a rude awakening.
So it's like a warning sign.
It is.
A potential vulnerability in the Canadian economy that we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And it really highlights the importance of looking beyond the surface level data and digging deeper into the underlying trends.
So what are some of the key takeaways you've gleaned from this deep dive?
I'd say there are a few key things to keep in mind. First, the Canadian job market is sending mixed signals.
Wow.
Yes, we're seeing growth in some areas,
Right.
but there are also concerns about a potential recession
Right.
and the impact of U.S. trade policy. Second, population growth is a major factor to watch.
Yeah.
It's fueling economic activity, but it's also putting pressure on housing and resources.
Right.
And if that growth slows down, it could expose some underlying weaknesses in the economy.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
It can boost the economy in the short term.
Yeah. But it also creates challenges that need to be addressed.
And third, this jobs report is a snapshot, not the whole story.
Right.
It's a data point in time that needs to be considered within the broader economic context.
Absolutely. We need to look at the long-term trends, the
Yeah.
global factors,
Mhm.
and the human impact to get a complete picture of what's happening in the Canadian economy.
So a holistic view is essential.
It is.
We can't just focus on the numbers in isolation.
Right.
We need to connect them to the real world and understand how they affect people's lives.
That's what makes this kind of deep dive so valuable.
Yeah.
It allows us to move beyond the headlines and engage with the complexities of the issues.
It's about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture,
Yeah.
and using that knowledge to make informed decisions.
And hopefully to spark meaningful conversations and actions.
Now, you mentioned the human impact,
Yes.
and we talked about the affordability crisis,
Right.
particularly in Ontario. The AMO report and those Reddit threads were quite eye-opening.
They were.
It's clear that many Canadians are struggling,
Yeah.
even with job growth.
It's a paradox
It
because
is.
we have a growing economy,
Right.
but many people are still struggling to make ends meet.
So the benefits of that growth aren't being shared equally?
It seems that way.
What do you think needs to be done to address this?
Well, I think we need to start by acknowledging that the current economic model isn't working for everyone.
Right.
We need to move beyond the traditional measures of success.
Like GDP growth.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
start focusing on measures that reflect people's well-being.
So things like quality of life.
Right.
access to essential services, and income equality.
Precisely. We need to create an economy that's not just productive, but also equitable and sustainable.
And what role can individuals play in this?
I think individuals can make a difference in a few ways.
Yeah.
First, by being informed and engaged citizens.
Okay.
We need to understand the issues,
Mm-hmm.
hold our elected officials accountable,
Yeah.
and advocate for policies that promote a more just and equitable society.
So being informed and engaged is crucial.
It is.
What else can individuals do?
Well, we can also support businesses and organizations that align with our values.
Okay.
For example, we can choose to buy from companies that pay their workers a living wage,
Right.
or invest in companies that are committed to sustainability.
So making conscious choices as consumers and investors can have a positive impact.
It can.
And finally, we can make a difference in our own communities.
Okay.
By volunteering our time, donating to local charities,
Yeah.
or simply being good neighbors.
So even small actions can have a ripple effect
They can.
and contribute to a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
So it's about taking action at all levels,
Right?
from the individual to the societal,
Exactly.
to create a more sustainable and equitable future for all Canadians.
Well said.
Now, I know we touched on the AMO report earlier, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper into the issue of homelessness in Ontario.
It's a complex issue,
It is.
with a multitude of factors contributing to it.
And those Reddit threads really brought to light the personal stories and struggles people are facing.
They did.
It's easy to get caught up in the economic data,
Right.
but we can't forget that there are real people behind those numbers.
Absolutely. Every statistic represents a human life, a story of struggle and resilience.
So let's talk about some of those stories.
Okay?
What are some of the common themes that emerged from the Reddit threads? Well, one of the most common themes was the lack of affordable housing.
Okay.
Many people shared stories of being priced out of the rental market,
Uh-huh.
even those with steady jobs.
Yeah, that was really disheartening to read.
It
To
is.
think that even with a job, you can still struggle to afford a place to live.
The cost of housing has been rising much faster than wages in many parts of Canada.
And that's creating a real affordability crisis.
It is.
What other themes emerged from the threads?
Another common theme was the lack of mental health and addiction support.
Okay.
Many people shared stories of struggling with these issues and feeling like they didn't have access to the help they needed.
And that lack of support can contribute to homelessness
It can.
by making it harder for people to get back on their feet.
Exactly. And it's a vicious cycle.
Right.
Without adequate support, people struggling with mental health and addiction are more likely to end up on the streets.
And once they're on the streets, it becomes even harder to access the help they need.
Right. They face stigma,
Yeah.
discrimination, and a lack of resources.
It's a tragic situation,
It is.
and one that requires a multifaceted approach to address.
Absolutely. It's not a simple problem with a simple solution.
So what are some of the things that need to be done to tackle this issue?
Well, first and foremost, we need to increase the supply of affordable housing.
Okay.
We need to build more units
Mm.
and provide subsidies to make housing more accessible to low-income individuals and families.
So it's about making housing more affordable.
It is.
What else can be done?
We also need to improve access to mental health and addiction support.
Right.
We need more funding for these services.
Yeah.
And we need to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health and addiction.
So it's about providing people with the support they need to get back on their feet
Exactly.
and to prevent homelessness in the first place.
And that's where community outreach and support programs can play a vital role.
Okay.
By connecting with people on the streets,
Mm-hmm.
building relationships,
Yeah.
and offering them a helping hand.
So it's about a holistic approach,
It is.
addressing both the systemic issues and the individual needs.
Absolutely. We need to tackle this issue from all angles.
Now, the AMO report mentioned a staggering figure,
Yeah.
$13 billion needed over the next decade to address homelessness in Ontario.
That's a significant investment,
It is.
but it's one that's necessary.
Do you think so?
I do?
Why?
Because the cost of inaction is far greater.
Okay.
Homelessness has a ripple effect throughout society. It impacts our healthcare system,
Right.
our justice system,
Mm-hmm.
and our overall quality of life.
So addressing homelessness is not just a moral imperative.
It's also an economic one.
It makes sense.
We need to invest in solutions
Okay.
to prevent homelessness,
Right.
support those experiencing it,
Mm-hmm.
and create a more just and compassionate society.
Well said.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
If you were in a position to make a difference, What would you do to address the issue of homelessness in your community?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
I agree.
Because we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.
And sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest impact.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to our final source for today.
Okay.
CTV News published an article titled Job Growth Masks Deepening Inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And this ties in perfectly with some of the themes we've been discussing
It does.
about the disconnect between the positive economic data
Right.
and the lived reality of many Canadians.
So let's dive into this article
Please do it.
and explore how job growth can mask deepening inequality.
What are some of the key findings from the CTV News article?
The article highlights the fact that while Canada has seen significant job growth in recent years,
Okay.
the gains haven't been shared equally across all segments of society.
Right, that's what we were just talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, so the article confirms what we've been seeing in the other sources?
It does.
That there's a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Precisely. And it points to a few key factors driving this trend.
Okay, what are those factors?
One factor is the rise of automation and technology,
Okay.
which is displacing workers in certain industries.
So jobs are being lost to machines.
In some cases, yes,
Okay.
particularly in manufacturing and other sectors that rely on repetitive tasks.
And what happens to those workers?
Well, some are able to transition to new jobs,
Okay.
but often those new jobs pay less
Right.
and offer fewer benefits.
So it's a downward spiral for many workers.
It can be.
They lose their good-paying jobs to automation
Right.
and then have to settle for lower-paying jobs with less security.
Exactly. And this contributes to income inequality.
Okay, so automation is one factor.
What else is driving this trend? Another factor is globalization,
Okay.
which is leading to increased competition from low-wage countries.
So Canadian companies are moving jobs overseas to save money.
Some are.
And that's putting downward pressure on wages in Canada.
Exactly, because companies have to compete with those lower labor costs.
No, it's a race to the bottom.
In some ways, yes.
Okay.
And it's the workers who often end up paying the price. And a third factor is government policy. Some government policies, like tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy,
Okay.
can exacerbate income inequality by concentrating wealth at the top.
So these policies are making the rich richer,
Yeah.
while the rest of us are struggling to keep up.
Essentially.
It's like the game is rigged.
Well, some would argue that it is.
Okay, so we've got automation, globalization, and government policy all contributing to deepening inequality in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions,
It certainly is.
but it's one that we need to address.
Absolutely.
Because if we don't, the gap between the rich and the poor will only continue to widen.
And that could lead to social unrest, political instability,
Yeah.
and a decline in overall well-being.
So it's not just an economic issue.
It's a societal one.
It affects all of us.
It does.
Now, the CTV News article also touched on the impact of income inequality on mental health.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Studies have shown that income inequality can have a negative impact on mental health.
Okay.
People living in societies with high levels of inequality tend to experience higher rates of stress, anxiety, and depression.
And why is that?
Well, one theory is that income inequality creates a sense of social comparison.
Okay.
People are constantly comparing themselves to others.
Right.
And when they see a huge gap between themselves and the wealthy, it can lead to feelings of inadequacy.
So it's like keeping up with the Joneses, but on a societal scale.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that could be incredibly damaging to people's mental health.
Absolutely, because it creates a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Like no matter how hard you work, you'll never be able to catch up. And it also erodes social cohesion.
Okay.
When people feel like they're not being treated fairly, it can lead to distrust and resentment.
So income inequality can have a ripple effect throughout society, impacting not just our economy, but also our mental health and social well-being.
Precisely.
Now, I know we've been talking about a lot of heavy stuff today,
We have.
but I want to end on a note of hope.
Okay.
Because despite these challenges, there are also reasons for optimism.
Absolutely.
There are people and organizations working hard to address these issues. And there are solutions out there.
There are.
We just need to find the political will to implement them.
Well said.
So let's not give up hope.
Right?
Let's keep fighting for a more just and equitable society for all Canadians.
I'm with you on that.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
but I think it's important to circle back to our original question.
Okay.
What does this jobs report really mean?
Yeah, what do we learn from all these different sources?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways is that we need to be cautious about celebrating economic growth without considering the bigger picture.
Right.
Job growth is important,
It is.
but it's not the only measure of a healthy economy.
Absolutely. We need to look at factors like income inequality, affordability, and social well-being to get a complete picture of how the economy is performing. And we need to be mindful of the potential risks,
Right.
like a hidden recession or the impact of U.S. trade policy. And we need to remember that behind every statistic, there are real people
Absolutely.
with real lives and real struggles.
So this jobs report is a starting point,
Yeah.
not an ending point.
It's a snapshot of a moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't tell the whole story.
It's up to us to dig deeper,
Right.
explore different perspectives,
Yeah.
and ask those tough questions,
To get a more complete understanding of what's happening in the Canadian economy.
and to work towards a more equitable and sustainable future for all.
So as we conclude this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
I want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay, I'm listening.
Don't just accept the headlines at face value.
Right.
Dig deeper.
Yeah.
Explore different sources
Mm-hmm.
and form your own informed opinions.
Because an informed citizenry is essential for a healthy democracy
Absolutely.
and a just and equitable society.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep learning,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Mm-hmm.
and keep pushing for a better future for all Canadians.
Well said. It's a tough one, but I think for me, it would be trying to shift the conversation around success
The-
away from purely economic indicators,
Okay.
like GDP growth,
Right.
and towards a more holistic view that encompasses social and environmental well-being.
So moving beyond just the numbers
Exactly.
and looking at the bigger picture.
Right, because a healthy economy should be a means to an end,
Okay.
not an end in itself.
What do you mean by that?
Well, ultimately, the goal of any economy should be to improve people's lives,
Right.
to provide them with the resources and opportunities they need to thrive.
Yeah.
But too often we get caught up in chasing economic growth
Right.
without considering the social and environmental costs.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems.
It can, like the ones we've been discussing today. Income inequality,
Right.
affordable housing crises,
Mhm.
environmental degradation. So we need to redefine what success looks like
Okay.
and start prioritizing policies that promote well-being for all Canadians.
Not just economic growth.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message.
And one that I think resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because at the end of the day, we all want to live in a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Absolutely.
And we're not just chasing profits,
Right.
but also building a better future for generations to come.
Well said.
Thanks.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Canadian job market for December 2024.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure having you here to share your insights.
My pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
from the surprising job numbers to the potential for a hidden recession,
Right.
the impact of U.S. trade policy,
And the very real struggles Canadians are facing with affordability and inequality. It's clear that the Canadian economy is at a crossroads,
it is.
and the decisions we make today will have a profound impact on our future.
Absolutely.
So let's choose wisely.
And let's work together to create a more just, equitable,
Yeah.
and sustainable future for all Canadians.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And keep those questions coming.
We'll be back next time with another thought-provoking discussion.
Until then, stay curious.
Stay engaged.
Yeah, because the future of Canada is in our hands.
And remember, the more informed we are,
Mm-hmm.
the better equipped we'll be to shape that future.
Absolutely, knowledge is power.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.